All right. Hello from all of us at Inkululeko. Thank you for tuning in to our third episode of the Black Lives Matter video podcast. We're so happy that you're able to sit and listen to our wonderful guests today. I'm Danielle Gervasio. I'm the Public Relations and Outreach Coordinator for Inkululeko.
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Leray, and I'm currently a summer intern for Inkululeko, and I'm a student at Villanova University.
So just to give a little more context behind our video podcast, we wanted to create a space where we could bolster Black voices to better support equity within education and in the world too. And so we wanted to disseminate the thoughts of incredible professionals all over the world within the education sector globally. So, thoughts from the last episode. We had Sanele on here for episode 2, and he gave us incredible insight on how Black consciousness can dismantle oppressive structures, and which serves as a great transition today for our third episode for our guest, because Ronald Taylor has an incredible emphasis on bolstering Black male achievement within his work, and I'll let Teresa introduce him.
Yeah, so we're so excited today to have Ronald Taylor to come join us and talk about his experience. Ronald's currently serving as a master's in private school leadership at the Teachers College at Columbia University, and he's also received his graduate degree of the School of Education and Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs with a master's in history education and a bachelor's degree in political science and policy studies at Syracuse University. And Ron currently serves for a board member for Inkululeko and also the secretary. He was previously a research intern and consultant for Inkululeko while he was an undergrad at Syracuse University. He is currently an educator at Horace Mann School for grades 7 and 8 in history, and he is the incoming associate director of the Office for Identity, Culture, and Institutional Equity at Horace Mann School. And he's also the founding co-director of HM Steps at Horace Mann, and he's the founder-president of RJT Solutions, LLC. Ron has previously been the teacher assistant at Nikita School in Gramson, South Africa, and he's teacher and mentor coordinator for young men and color with the Harlem Children's Zone. Ron also has many acquired awards, one of them being the Specter Award Holocaust Fellow in 2019, the Carnegie Fellowship for the National Board for Certified Teachers in 2016, the Imagining America Engagement Fellowship in 2016 and 2017, the Bard College Institute for Writing and Thinking Fellow in 2016-2017, and the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans in 2014. Ron also has some public research, which is the FIRE this time, assessing the scalability of supportive service programs for young men of color. So thank you so much, Ron, for coming today. We're so excited to have you on our podcast.
No, thank you. Thank you for doing a great job on all the things that I've done.
You have a very impressive resume, Ron. We love it.
I'll tell you something. Looking at your resume, there was a lot. Very, very, very achieved. And we're so happy that you're here with us. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Just to jump in, our first question, Ron, is how did you, just kind of a little background, how do you get to where you are today, and how has your identity influenced your journey?
Definitely. So that's a hard question because when you think about how you got to where you are, there are so many factors that contribute to it. But to boil it down into, I guess, 3 buckets. The first is just a really robust and invested family. I came from a family that was very big on educational outcomes, that was extremely big on you have 2 options in life. It's either going to school or working in construction. And I was not fond of construction. So that was it. And so I think that gave me the drive that I had to naturally enter into spaces and quote unquote, work towards achievement. But I think as far as professionally, the time that we're living in the midst of a pandemic, racial injustice, et cetera, what really brought me to where I am today is being really concerned about other people and being really interested in seeing how other people are able to have a quality of life that shows they are worthy of dignity and respect. I think all too often we fall into the trap as a society of saying somebody doesn't deserve basic access to aspects of human life and existence. And we don't, in my opinion, we don't have that authority to dictate who gets that option and who doesn't. So working in education ultimately came from, I would say, a family that was already big on education, but then even more so from this, I guess, this consistent flame to always want to make sure that people have access to spaces to become their best selves, which as I start a new job in a week, being the associate director of my job's diversity office, essentially, my job literally is being to sit down and work and speak with systems and speak truth to power in those systems to make sure that folks to get the access that they need. So in short, I would say what has brought me here is family, that unending passion for others, and also a little bit of craziness, right? I think that the work that I'm engaging in, it's so personalized. It's so self-centered to a certain extent. So sometimes it does get difficult separating my professional from my personal. But what I'm thankful for is that I do work in a field that if we do things right, we can produce an amazing generation of young people. If we do things wrong, we produce more of the same. And so I think that's what brought me to this point, if that makes
that's really
sense.
great. Thank you so much, Ron, for sharing. That was great.
Yeah.
It gives us a really good background in terms of, where you're coming from and what grounds you. So thank you for that. So as aforementioned, you have an emphasis on Black male achievement. I think this is so integral to changing the system because it often criminalizes and weaponizes Black men especially. Can you go through your thought process in terms of creating a lesson plan on any given day? How do you think that this specific emphasis will create Black solidarity, not only on a national context, but maybe on a global one? And I'm sorry if this is such a big, huge...
No, it's fine. I was like, all right, where do I start? But so I think with anything, so I guess I'll start at the top. The reason why I focus on Black male achievement specifically is because if you look across any statistical subset, any statistical program, you see that educationally African American men tend to be underachieving unless there are certain things that are present in the educational pipeline. So usually that's a certain degree of a sense of belonging. There's a certain sense of community-based understanding, and providing students mirrors of themselves. So in other words, if I'm a young African-American boy and I'm in a school where my teachers don't mirror my experiences and therefore they have some cultural misunderstandings, of course I'm going to get suspended more because you don't understand me or my lived experience. So how do I take that and apply it to my teaching and ultimately facilitation? Is every lesson I really work to think about what opportunity do my students have to see themselves, to see their experiences, and then also what are the opportunities they get to see other folks' experiences, and how do I keep that balanced? So in short, so for example, this isn't to be a crazy thing, but in some lessons, for example, this year I had a really heavy woman identifying population in my 7th grade. And so a lot of my activities that were a little bit more kinesthetic and movement centered, I had to decrease a bit and do more like turning and talking and stop and jots. And those are small instructional choices because the majority of my students are more so private learners. And that's not to say women are private learners, but that was just the way that they learned as far as this year was concerned. The year previously, I had more boys of color in one of my sections. And so because I knew about their experiences, because I take the time to learn about my students, it was just a matter of thinking about, okay, so in this lesson, let me do some leadership development and let me give them the opportunity to feel like they're driving the lesson because they don't get that experience in other classroom settings. How that can be extrapolated to more systemic and policy levels is the $1 million question. So, I mean, thankfully, to a certain extent, I do work in an independent school, so there is more autonomy. But I think when we look at the public school system, there is autonomy there, but then folks kind of get wrapped up in the idea of state standards and exams to the point where it becomes debilitating, which is actually why I transitioned out of public and charter and went into independent education. But when we think about public school systems, really, if we give students the space to see themselves, to identify the things that actually speak to who they are as young people, they're going to perform better. All the research shows that both from the 1950s forward, after Brown v. Board. And so really, I think it's just educators being able to make the decisions around the table. I'm not a fan of working in spaces where someone who hasn't been in the classroom for God knows how long is dictating policy. I appreciate the space that I work in now because everyone from our head of school down to the assistant teachers are in a classroom and they're speaking to real time. So no, that was like a lot in like 5 seconds, but hopefully that kind of gets at the question you all posed.
That was incredibly comprehensive. Thank you so much.
Good.
I think that also this connects so well with Sanela's episode last episode, because he talked a lot about how language can be so exclusive and a true block in access to education, especially in South Africa, because there's so many languages, and there are 11 national languages, like I mentioned before in the last episode. But really, truly seeing yourself in your education really bolsters your your self-value when you're learning, and you when you're learning and you see your teacher who understands who you are. That really makes a difference, and who the teacher doesn't think, one size fits all. So this is how I did my last class, this is how I'm going to do my next class, so I think that's incredibly important, and that's really inspirational. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
So I do want to talk about, I want to highlight also women, Black women as well. So there are countless statistics, as well as in terms of the adultification and commodification of Black women. And although you do have an incredible emphasis on Black male achievement, which is incredibly important, would you also be able to speak on how we can go about integrating or making space for the achievement of Black women as well in education?
Yeah, of course. I'm glad you asked that question, because I think all too often people think that if someone focuses on like Black male achievement, they're kind of divorcing everything else. But oftentimes what I say is that the reason why I focus personally on Black male achievement is because I've experienced life as one. But I'll be the first to also say, in any setting, especially in the school that I work now, I'm not into the business of erasing Black women and girls, because quite frankly, they tend to suffer more in these systems, oftentimes more than African-American men and boys. But it's erased so well because we adultify these groups of people. The reason why that's important is because in the role that I'm transitioning into now, a lot of our work at the school that I'm at centers around, I guess, not an antiquated, but a pretty traditional model of diversity education, and thinking about identifying things for kids, giving them opportunities to engage in question. But I really want to push towards how do we get kids to engage in question in a means towards looking at justice. And I think that we have so many young women and girls, especially Black women and girls, that are experiencing things that are pushing them to say, well, what about me? And how can I make my voice heard? That I really want to make space for that in our curriculum and in our school. This year, what we did to actually test try that, I actually was on our 7th grade team this year in our history department, and we taught the Civil War completely centered under a Black woman's voice, being Sojourner Truth. And that was a really powerful moment, because interacting with my Black girls, it was like seeing their interest, even girls that go to this quote unquote, elite school, seeing their interest from this unit across others was super interesting, just because they didn't know that historically they had that much collective impact on this country. And I always think the joke, delete probably women of color from any aspect of history in this country, and the country probably wouldn't have gone very far. From the beginning. So ultimately, what I try to do is remind folks that I'm not interested in either or, but a both and. I have a focus, but I don't divorce Black women and girls from my work. And I think that's actually important on a policy level, because if you look at most schools' approaches, here in New York, we had all these big pushes for young men and boys of color, which is impressive. But everyone's like, so what about the women and girls? Are they just perfect? Well, no. We know that's not the case. They actually have a lot of things that are traumatizing them. And I think, given the socio-political context we live in now, we can even look at the energy that we've seen in the recent killings that have happened in this country. Breonna Taylor's murderers have yet to be arrested. It's been 100 days. But we saw there was a completely different approach given the other situations that were happening. And so for me, I use the focus on Black men and boys, honestly, to get people focused on folks of color. But ultimately, it's almost a lure to also engage Black women and girls in their issues within our school settings. Because truthfully, Black women are the largest growing educational group in this country. And if we don't actually insulate that group, we are going to contribute to a lot of folks getting many great degrees, but not getting the actual support they need in those schools, which is like the big dark cloud that I see. I'm very worried about. And I'm hoping to inform in the work that I'll be doing, especially this coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just want to highlight that you are teaching grades 7 and 8, and if our viewers can think about where they were when they were in 7th grade, 8th grade, you know, you're very inward looking, and you're very, self-conscious about who you are in the world, and where you fit in the world, and where you fit in the cafeteria, where like where who
Yes.
you're sitting next to. So that's incredibly important work, and to have an approach that envisions Black women and girls as well is incredibly important, and we thank you for that as well. And we're learning. So
Yeah.
thank you. So I do want to ask about so we did sort of touch on policy, but if you want to add anything else, or if you don't, totally fine. There are a lot of detrimental and whitewashed pitfalls within the education system when teaching us about history, especially BIPOC history, especially Black history within this country, which then in turn affects how we treat others and how we create and reinforce oppressive systems. So for the people who are demanding change within the curriculum taught in their schools, what specifically can they ask from school districts, from the state, from the Department of Education? If you want to just give one, definitely add this in your letter or in your email or what have you to the state or the school district, Department of Ed, whatever you want to add.
Yeah, so that's like a dissertation.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question that I always ask is, why are we preparing today's kids for yesterday's problems? And so that's like the question that I would say throw in that letter if you're sending to, your state legislature. And the reason why I say that is because even when I look at the way in which we approach diversity and difference across the curriculum, ultimately the reason why, this is my non-PhD opinion, the reason why I think that we have so much lack of achievement is because we're preparing kids for a world that they're not going to live in. So if you prepare me to be well-versed in a white-centric narrative, I'm going to walk into a workplace and be really underwhelming and actually a really poor critical thinker. I hate to say it. I love Syracuse University, but I learned the most in my undergraduate program, I would say, in all of my courses, like the ones in South Africa when I went abroad and first was introduced to the organization, that pushed me to think away from this Western white-centric narrative. I'm in education because of that summer that I spent in South Africa looking at this educational system, literally saying, why is it that this system looks the way that it does? And why are we trying to conform kids to this westernized model of education when it's not fitting into their cultural context, right? And so that's like my thought. And I think, honestly, to borrow from Christopher Emdam's work at Columbia, looking at the reality pedagogy that we approach, right? So it's one thing to be aware of the students that we teach, but it's one thing to also teach them to be aware of the socio-political realities that are informing their lives so they can use their education to dismantle them. My parents did a great job sending me to great parochial schools growing up. But what I will say is that those schools gave me great, understanding the white world context. I came out really well versed in Shakespeare and the whole nine. But I did not come out with the tools and the skill set to understand, how do I look at microaggressions in the workplace and dismantle them? How do I look at microaggressions in my school and dismantle them? And I'm proud that this education that my kids are receiving, that I'm teaching currently and working with, that's what their education's geared toward, because that's the world they're going into. But ultimately, I think those are the questions we have to be asking, because from the math classroom all the way to the history classroom, if we're not asking, what are the real lived experiences that our kids are facing. We're not really teaching them. We're just giving them something to fill them up for 18 years and keep it pushing. And it's possible. I've seen science classrooms that are teaching fourth graders about pollution and then do this amazing segue into environmental racism in New York City and looking at, we live in the Bronx. Why is there higher incidence of asthma here? Let's do an ethnographic study like in fourth grade. I'm like, I wasn't doing that in fourth grade, right? But it shows that when teachers actually start pushing kids to think about their realities, that's what education is. Like, education isn't to go sit in a room and get filled up with some stuff that might be helpful for an SAT, which may not even be like around in 3 years, but it's more so about how do we prepare kids to do the work that they need to do. And yeah, that's what I really think this needs to happen. Like, I'm tired of watching all these, C-SPAN videos of folks pontificate. I'm like, these are other people's children, and your lack of action is violent at the end of the day, which is why I am very pointed in the language that I use whenever I'm speaking and engaging in my professional setting. I'm the first to say, I know you have feelings, but I don't care about them because these are other people's children. And my feelings are not more important than a child's well-being. And if you think that, then please leave education now. If I was a millionaire, I would pay your severance to get you out of there. Like, you don't need to be there. But yeah, that's what I think. Now, that was a lot in like 3 seconds.
No, it was incredible. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Absolutely. So we do want to give you, I was hitting you hard with the questions.
No, it's fine.
So we want to wrap up with a very light wrap-up question. And Teresa will take the last one.
Yeah. So has there ever been a time in your professional and personal development when you felt unsuccessful? And do you have a message for the young BIPOC who are experiencing this? And how did you kind of move past this? So kind of like just a final little message of hope for everyone.
Of course. I feel unsuccessful every day. That there's no such thing as everything being in complete balance and perfection, right? That's the issues with humanity. We try to find perfection or complete balance. What I would say to any younger person listening to this is really to remember that Rome was not built in a day. That's a saying that I've heard my entire life. But then more so, you are enough. And I say that because I think especially now, because we're in front of screens because of the pandemic, like, we're hyper aware of what everyone else is doing. I have friends who have like started whole like self-care clubs or whatever the case is over the quarantine, or like found the meaning of their life. And I'm like, that's great for them. But what I'm also doing now is enough for me. Because I think I'm like baby plagiarizing from Maya Angelou / Oprah. I think it's where I'm getting this idea from. But
that's totally fine.
I was like, so I will cite that source. I think I took this idea from them. But when we wake up each morning, we're not in a competition with anyone outside of ourselves. And if you want to view life as a competition, I think more so what's important is to view that each day that you get up and contribute something to the world is important. And I don't care what Bill Gates did or what, Malala Yousafzai did. I care more so about what I did today. And that's enough. So I would say, remember that and only compete with yourself. So I think that Beyonce, Oprah, and Maya Angelou all said some iteration of that. So I'm just borrowing their words.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Keep pushing.
Right.
So thank you so much for all of your insight. We packed so much in the 25 minutes that we had, and we're so incredibly thankful that you were able to take the time out to speak with us today, because it was so insightful. That's all for now. We'll talk more throughout the coming weeks, and we'll have several other engagements with incredible professionals like Ron. And so thank you again, Ron, for taking the time out. We appreciate you. And also, I want you to be, I wish I had a teacher like you when I was in 7th, 8th grade.
I was just about to say that. I said I wish Ron was my 7th grade teacher.
Yeah.
They say that now, but September through November, he has too many rules.
So thank you all, and that's it.